On today's episode, I'm reacting to all of the Week 8 games, plus all the fantasy studs coming right up. And what's up, everyone, and welcome to the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast for Monday, November 2nd, 2020. And I'm Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to share our podcast, you can find us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please hit subscribe, please support the show, hit the bell so you don't miss any more episodes. And on today's episode, I'm going to go over all my Week 8 reactions, plus all the fantasy studs for Week 8. But before we get into that, how was everyone's Halloween? Did you still go out trick-or-treating? Did you stay home and have a kind of a laid-back type of Halloween? I know for me, me and my daughter just chilled here. We just carved some pumpkins. We dressed up like Batman and just hung out. We watched some Halloween movies. But unfortunately, I think my daughter's going to be one of those people who likes to set up their Christmas decorations on Halloween because, we were super excited to celebrate Halloween. Carving our pumpkins, dressing up like Batman and all that, and then went to go put on Netflix, and we're going through the movies to figure out what we can watch. I mean, she's 5 years old, so trying to find something that's appropriate for her to watch. And then here comes The Grinch, and she wanted to watch The Grinch. So we watched the Jim Carrey version of The Grinch, and then we watched the animated version of The Grinch. And then once we were able to watch those two, movies, I convinced her to be able to watch a Halloween-themed movie. So we ended up watching Goosebumps. And if you don't know what Goosebumps is, it was a book series that came out when I was a kid. So I'm 35 years old. So when I was growing up, Goosebumps was one of the popular books. R.L. Stein was able to, create like this volume of, books to, it came out on a regular basis where it was like a collector, you collected them. So like I had every volume of the Goosebumps books every single time that one came out. I had to get it just so I had that collection on my bookshelf. So overall, obviously, it's very poorly done. The acting, just the way they shoot everything was very, very awful. But she doesn't know to know what to expect. But overall, pretty chill. Actually, it was not too bad at all. It was nice to be able to just have kind of that relaxing night. But if you saw my YouTube video on Saturday when I did my injury updates, I was dressed up like Heisenberg in that video. So if you guys don't know who Heisenberg is, that's Walter White's. When he becomes a drug lord in Breaking Bad, Heisenberg is his alter ego, so I dressed up like him. So if you want to check that out, watch the Saturday injury updates video. And today, like I said, today I'm going to go over all the Week 8 reactions. But before I do that, we're going to go into some of the injury news that took place on Sunday. And right off the bat, let's start off with the 49ers. Jimmy G, he left the game early with the ankle injury. George Kittle left the game early. And then they're having MRIs today to determine the severity of the soft tissue damage. Now, the x-rays came back negative, so that's a good sign. There's nothing broken, but obviously the MRI will determine the severity and how long they may or may not be out. Tevin Coleman, he left the game early as well with the knee injury. He is a guy that, obviously just came off an IR, so now the MRI will determine the severity of his injury, so he likely could be out in Week 9. And then T.Y. Hilton of the Indianapolis Colts, he left the game early with a groin injury. So he's going to be week to week based on what the results come back on the MRI. And then Kenny Golladay of the Detroit Lions, he left the game early with a hip injury. Now Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network reported this morning that he will now be out for Week 9. He's already ruled out, and he's considered week to week. So Kenny Golladay, he had a goose egg for you yesterday. If you weren't able to watch any of the games or find any news on him, that's the reason why. Just a bad game just because of the injury. And then going to the Packers, which could be a little concerning because they have a Thursday night matchup on this week. Now, A.J. Dillon has tested positive for COVID-19. So with that being the case, they have to, obviously he's on the reserved COVID-19 list, so now he's out. But what does that mean for the rest of the Packers? What does that mean for Jamal Williams? What does that mean for Aaron Jones? So they play Thursday night, so they need to have negative test, hopefully come back tomorrow, where it won't alter that game, because that game, if there's any more positive tests, will be postponed maybe Sunday or maybe Monday based on what the NFL decides to do. But something to monitor, because obviously we always want to make sure we're in the know of all the stuff that goes on with COVID and all these games. And then going on to the Arizona Cardinals, running back Kenyon Drake got some good news, and it looks like his ankle injury was not as severe as initially reported. So it looks like he has a slight chance to play week 9. However, I would caution that only because we know that Chase Edmonds has outshined him so far this season. And I believe that just because Kenyon Drake may be active for week 9 doesn't necessarily mean he's going to get the workload that he was getting before. So I think that it's positive that he's getting better and that his injury is not as bad as we thought. However, just be cautious when he is active if you want to plug him in your lineup. I understand if he's your best running back, you have to play him. But if there's a way to be able to play a matchup that week in the sense of who you have available in your league or who's on your roster, I would do that. But look, that's why we have the practice reports. That's why we see how he does in practice and what the coaches tell us. So if he's going to be named the starter, then you have to play him. And then one big thing about tomorrow is that it's the NFL trade deadline. So there could be some names that are on the move. However, trade deadline's a little different this year than than prior years, only because of the COVID-19 protocol. Now, if any offensive player gets traded, or any player at all, they have to have 6 days straight of negative tests in order to even play for that team. And so that means that if any offensive player or defensive player gets traded by the deadline tomorrow, that means that they won't play in week 9. So there's like rumors out there like, Kenny Stills, Will Fuller, some of these guys are on the trade block per se. So if that's the case and they're on your roster, you're not going to be able to play them. But we do know as of right now that Quan Alexander of the 49ers got traded from the 49ers to the Saints. So there's some defensive players being moved as well. So I think that it'll be interesting to kind of see how this takes place, or if there's been any trades at all, only because of the availability of these players after a trade. So just something that you need to monitor as the week progresses. And then now going on to my favorite part of Monday's podcast is the top plays by Next Gen Stats. And starting off with the fastest ball carrier goes to Trevon Diggs of the Dallas Cowboys. He got an interception last night, and he was able to run his return with a 21.72 miles per hour. So he was the fastest player for week 8. And then the longest play goes to Miami's wide receiver, Jakeem Grant. He had a a punt return for 88 yards. But in order to get that touchdown, he had to run 117.3 yards. So we have not seen a punt return yet this year. He was able to get one, so that was cool to see. And then when it comes to the improbable completion, Justin Herbert was able to complete a pass to Mike Williams for 36 yards and had a completion percentage of only 19.2%. So that was the lowest percentage completion rate this week. And then going to the remarkable rushes, Philip Lindsay popped off a 55-yard touchdown run, and it was only expected to go 4 yards, and he was able to run 51 yards over expected. So that was a cool game to see Philip Lindsay come back and have a long run. Obviously, if you're a Melvin Gordon owner, it hurt you because he's now going to take the workload away from Melvin Gordon. So not a good game overall for Melvin Gordon. And then the fastest sack went to Eagles inside linebacker TJ Edwards. He was able to sack Ben DiNucci in 2.5 seconds. And if you watched that game last night, DiNucci had no chance. And we saw it with all the turnovers, even on both sides of the ball. That was just an ugly game last night. I'll get to that later. But that was the fastest sack for week 8. And now going on to all the matchups, I'm going to start off with the Patriots versus the Bills. The Patriots were able to win. The Bills won this game 24-21. And if you're watching this game, it was unfortunate because the Cam Newton was driving down the field. They gave him the ball. He ran the ball, and the ball got knocked out, and he lost the fumble, in which they were already in field goal range. So they were trying to just get closer for the field goal. And a play that generally works 9 out of 10 times, he rushed the ball, he fumbled, and then, that's it. They lost the game 24-21. And honestly, Cam Newton, he didn't have an awful game. He didn't have any passing touchdowns, but he had a rushing touchdown, and he had 54 rushing yards plus his 174 passing yards. So not an awful game when he had 18, fantasy points. So better than most people this week. But he's still a guy that's on an offense that has no help. So he's still a guy that I'm not going to play if I don't have to. And if you're in 2 quarterback leagues, you may have to only because you may not have a better option. But he's a guy that, he has a safe floor. He's almost like Josh Allen because they have the rushing ability. Because Josh Allen, he didn't have any passing touchdowns either, but he had a rushing touchdown. So that's what makes this, these guys that can be dual threats have a safe floor because of that. And when it comes to the rushing game, Damian Harris, he had 16 rushes for 102 yards and a touchdown. So he's the guy that took the majority of the carries for the Patriots. And I've been saying this for a little bit now that I think Zach Moss has become the starter for the Bills because he had 14 carries for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. I don't think Devin Singletary is best as a change of pace back. I don't think he's the guy that's the answer for the workload. So I think you may see the Bills kind of transition into having Zach Moss as their starter. And when it comes to receiving, Stephon Diggs, he had a good game. He had 6 catches for 92 yards, but he had 9 targets, so he's obviously the alpha guy in that wide receiving group. But Cole Beasley had a good game last week, had a 2-catch, 24-yard outing this week, so not very good for him. And then when it comes to John Brown's a guy that he was a hard person to want to start only because of his injuries. He only had 1 catch yesterday, so definitely not a good outing for him if you're playing him in fantasy. And then going on to the Titans versus the Bengals. The Bengals won this game 31-20. This is the second loss in a row for the Tennessee Titans after starting undefeated. Joe Burrow had a good game. 2 touchdowns. You had Tannehill. He had 2 touchdowns as well. So not awful games by these guys, but definitely not what you're used to seeing from the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry, he had a good game. He had 112 yards and a touchdown. Giovanni Bernard, he was able to fill in pretty well for Joe Mixon. He had 62 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And then he had a receiving touchdown. So this is a guy that obviously benefits if you are a Joe Mixon owner and you're able to play Giovanni Bernard. Obviously, Giovanni Bernard's not as talented as Joe Mixon, but he at least got you some fantasy help there this week. And then when it comes to the receiving, Corey Davis, he led the Titans with 8 receptions for 128 yards and a touchdown. He had 10 targets. So A.J. Brown is the guy, and he had a touchdown as well, but he only had 7 targets. And I think a lot of it, too, is they try to take away the number 1 wide receiver. So Corey Davis benefited from that. And you're going to see that a lot because A.J. Brown is the number 1 receiver. But overall, good game from those guys if you're playing in PPR formats. T. Higgins, a good game. Tyler Boyd, another good game. Jonnu Smith, I'm sorry. He only had 2 catches for 29 yards, so a disappointing game from Smith. And then going on to the Raiders versus the Browns. Now, this is a game that should have been a good fantasy game, right? Because of the matchups and everything. But however, there was so much wind in that game that it was very hard to pass the ball. It was hard to kick the ball, kick field goals. The Raiders won this game 16-6, but just an ugly game overall. There's nothing really you can really be mad about. I mean, sometimes you can have the best matchups, but if the weather doesn't, really is not on your side, then it's definitely not going to be a good fantasy outing, especially obviously when you're playing outdoors. So nothing much to talk about. I mean, Josh Jacobs had 31 carries for 128 yards, so not a bad game from him. Hunter Renfrow had a touchdown. So overall, I mean, it's a bad game, but you can't really, when weather takes effect like that, you just can't really be mad at the players in this type of situation. And going on to the Colts versus the Lions, I mean, this was a game I was not expecting from Phillip Rivers. The Colts won this game 41-21. Now, both quarterbacks had good games. Both had 3 touchdown passes. So Phillip Rivers, I mean, everyone was talking how he should be the one that gets benched in order to bring Jacoby Brissett because the offense was lackluster. But he came back with a strong showing, had 3 touchdown passes. So if you played him in fantasy, kudos to you. And then this was interesting for the rushing for the Colts. Jordan Wilkins led the backfield with 20 carries for 89 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor had 11 carries for 22 yards. So this is not something that you want to see from somebody that you hope to be your starting running back, but Jordan Wilkins had the majority of the carries. And then Nyheim Hines, of course, he comes with 2 touchdowns as well. And then you got DeAndre Swift, the last few games, he's been doing well. After the bye week, he had 2 good fantasy outings, and then he has 6 carries for 1 yard yesterday. So not very good showing from him. I mean, but Adrian Peterson, same thing. He had 5 carries for 7 yards. So definitely not good against this Colts at all. And then when it comes to the tight end position, you had Trey Burton. He was one of those waiver wire claims that everyone was talking about. He only had 3 receptions for 9 yards. And you look at Jack Doyle, he's the one who had the touchdown. So, it's one of those things where they have a lot of pass catchers and they have too many good tight ends to try to filter out which one's going to be the guy to start. So he is a good person to have on your lineup based on upside. But, both Marley Cox, Trey Burton, and Jack Doyle had reception in this game. So I just think that it's going to be Russian roulette with that backfield or with that tight end position. And then when it comes to like I said, with the Lions, when I said at the top of the podcast, Kenny Galladay was left catchless, but he had an injury. So Marvin Jones is a guy who had 3 receptions for 39 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's a guy that I'll be talking about on the waiver wire show tomorrow. And then TJ Hawkinson, he had a good game. He had 7 receptions for 65 yards. But the guy to talk about was Marvin Hall. Marvin Hall, he had 4 catches for 113 yards. So he had 7 targets. Marvin Jones had 7 targets. So see who's available in your league. My guess is both are going to be widely available in your leagues. Could be a guy to add when Kenny Galladay's out because this is a team that likes throwing the ball. And I think that you can benefit from having these guys on your roster if you need the help. And then going on to so we're going to go on to the Dalvin Cooks versus the DeAndre Adams game. The Dalvin Cooks won 28-22. There's nothing really to talk about this game other than Dalvin Cook was unstoppable yesterday. He had 226 all-purpose yards, 4 touchdowns, and then Devontae Adams had 3 touchdowns. So, this is a game where, I'm a Dalvin Cook fantasy one of my main leagues, so I was extremely happy. He had 48.6 PPR points, so I was extremely ecstatic about that. But it's just one of those things where this is the difference that Dalvin Cook makes to the Vikings, to your fantasy rosters, that this guy is so talented that it sucks to see this guy not be able to see him play 16 games a year. That, and he had a good game against the Packers in the first game of the season. He had 2 touchdowns. We didn't do this against them the first game of the season, but I just think that this game was just all Dalvin Cook, and the Vikings got the win in Green Bay, so definitely good for the Vikings. And when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers, he had 3 touchdowns. He had a good fantasy day. But just that last play, I don't know if you're watching, they were trying to get that Hail Mary. And I was watching that play. I'm like, I saw that guy just trucking after him. I'm like, I hope Aaron Rodgers gets this ball out. And then he gets hit, he fumbles the ball, and the Vikings win. But definitely a good game overall when it comes to fantasy, because you had Aaron Jones had a good game. Dalvin Cook had a good game. Robert Tonyan, he had a good game from a tight end perspective based on how volatile the tight ends have been this year. So overall, not a bad fantasy outing overall. Unless if you're playing Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, you're disappointed in that. But it was Dalvin Cook's show yesterday. Now going on to the Chiefs, they had a practice game yesterday against the New York Jets. They won that scrimmage game 35-9. Patrick Mahomes looks unstoppable yesterday. He had 5 touchdown passes. But when he's playing against nobody, it's easy to do that. But overall, Patrick Mahomes, good game. Yeah, Tyreek Hill had 2 touchdowns. Travis Kelce had a touchdown. But on the flip side of that, you saw that Clyde Edwards-Helaire didn't do much. Le'Veon Bell didn't do much. So it was an all-passing game. When they played the Bills a couple weeks ago, it was pretty much all running because of the weather. Yesterday, the running game didn't do anything, but the passing game was on fire. So just overall, a good game by the Chiefs. Now going on to the Rams versus the Dolphins. The Rams lost this game 28-17. Now, this is a tough matchup for any West Coast team. So they had a Monday night game, right? And then they have to travel to the East Coast, lose 3 hours on a weekend of daylight savings time. And they have to play Miami. They lost this game 20-17. That Miami Dolphins special teams and defense was just lights out yesterday. Jared Goff, he had a touchdown pass, but just could not get anything going. Robert Woods had a good game. Cooper Kupp in this game had 21 targets. Cooper Kupp, when I saw that, I was insane to see that Cooper Kupp has so many targets. But overall, he had 11 receptions for 110 yards, so a good game from him. Myles Gaskin had a touchdown. And I think a lot of, this was two got his first win. So we're looking at, I was watching a lot of sports channels this morning, kind of getting a feel on the Tua situation. And a lot of people are a little bit concerned about Tua. It was his first start. You got to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's a rookie. But there's a lot of talk about how he doesn't look big enough to play quarterback. And you put him against, I saw him, he looks small. But then I have to realize, I met Mike Vick in person. I was at SeaWorld, and he was in the same the Dolphin show that I was in, and we're walking out, and at first I didn't recognize him because he was wearing like one of those fisherman hats, and then like really like darked out like tinted sunglasses, so you couldn't really tell who it was. And then once he got closer to me, I realized it was Michael Vick. And Michael Vick was a huge guy. Like, based on, I mean, he's 5'8", he's almost 6 feet, right? But on the football field, he looks like he's not that big. But then when I saw him up close, I mean, this guy was built, and I was surprised at how big Michael Vick was. So I wonder if that's the same thing for Tua. He does look small when you're going against, like, lined up against 6'5", 6'6", 300-pound linemen. But one of the criticisms of him yesterday was that he looked very inaccurate. That when he got pressure up the middle, when he just pushed off his mark, he was not very accurate at all. You saw a few passes that he was just very off the mark. Now, he did have his first touchdown pass to Devontae Parker. My guess is that it's too early to determine how good these guys will be. I still think Tua has a chance based on ability, but I think for him, it's going to just be getting that feel for the NFL and being able to adjust. And it's just, he got his win, right? He got his touchdown pass, but I think it's a little premature to determine if he's going to be a bust or a star in this league. So we'll definitely see that, obviously as the games progress and as his career progresses. Now going on to the Steelers versus the Ravens. This was a good, hard-hitting game to watch. This was a win by the Steelers. They stay undefeated. They're 28-24 against the Ravens. Overall, fantasy-wise, it was kind of it was okay, I guess. I mean, you had Lamar Jackson. He had 2 touchdowns, but he had 4 turnovers. You had Big Ben. He had 2 touchdowns. He was able to get a touchdown to Chase Claypool, Eric Ebron. So not bad overall. But in this game, we know that Mark Ingram was out. So it was like, who's going to be the people who are going to be the guy that would lead the backfield in touches? And it really does not give us any help at all because both J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards had a majority of the carries. So Gus Edwards had 16 carries. J.K. Dobbins had 15 carries. Now, Dobbins had more yards with 113, but he didn't have a touchdown. But Gus Edwards had 87 yards and a touchdown. So it's one of those things where this backfield continues to be just too murky for me to want to grab anybody. Now, I think if you need help, I think Gus Edwards is more available in your leagues than J.K. Dobbins is. But it's still guys you have to pick up based on, ability. So I think that this was a very interesting thing to see, kind of see who was going to take over that lead back role with Mark Ingram out, and they both had almost the same amount of carries. So still a situation that's hard to determine who's going to be the alpha guy in that backfield with Mark Ingram out. Now going on to the Chargers versus the Broncos. The Chargers are just a team that just cannot win the close game. They lose this game 31-30. Drew Lock came back and was able to hit KJ Hamler in the back of the end zone for a touchdown yesterday. So they win. But Justin Herbert, he continues to look the part. He looks like a star. He had another 3 touchdown passes yesterday. So he continues to look good. Justin Jackson, he had the 17 carries for 89 yards. And then you had Mike Williams. Mike Williams had 5 receptions for 99 yards and a touchdown. Keenan Allen had a touchdown. And what's interesting about Keenan Allen, I just saw this yesterday before all the games, is that Keenan Allen has been targeted 60 times and he has 0 drops. So, that is remarkable. I didn't realize how good his hands were because we always talk about DeAndre Hopkins having glue hands and all that stuff. But Keenan Allen, that's remarkable to have so many targets and then not drop a pass. So, kudos to him. This guy is a target machine. Mike Williams, he's emerging. As long as he stays healthy, I think he's a good fantasy ad as well. But overall, it was Drew Lock who was able to get the attention in this game based on the comeback victories. So kudos to the Broncos. Now moving on to the New Orleans Saints versus Chicago Bears. The Saints won this game 26-23 in overtime. This was an interesting game to watch based on the Chicago Bears side. Nick Foles, he's just definitely not doing... he's doing enough, but I don't know if it's the upside that they're looking for. And a lot of people were talking about Mitch Trubisky coming back in and wanting him to take over the starting position again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there because he gave up a lot of sacks this year. Nick Foles, I think a lot of those plays that Mitch Trubisky was the quarterback, he would be able to scramble and get out of those, for plus yardage rather than getting sacked. So I think that's the problem is with Nick Foles. He did have 2 touchdown passes yesterday, so not awful, but critical moments, he took sacks when I think Mitch Trubisky would be able to, avoid those sacks. However, I mean, I'm not the coach, obviously, so I can't make that call. But I know a lot of Chicago Bears fans were tweeting out that they want Mitch Trubisky back in. And then Drew Brees, not a bad game for Drew Brees. He had 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's able to connect with Taysom Hill and Jared Cook. Now, Alvin Kamara, big game from him again. He had 12 carries for 67 yards. And then he had 9 receptions for 96 yards on 13 targets. So I think that, I was reading something this morning where Alvin Kamara is now on pace to get 125 receptions and over 1,200 yards receiving. That is crazy for a running back, because we saw Christian McCaffrey had a historic year last year. He had, I think, about, if I remember this correctly, 116 receptions. So he beat the record. I think it was like 106 before that. So he's on pace for that. But we know when Michael Thomas comes back, that could take away from, obviously, his trajectory for getting those receptions for the year. But Alvin Kamara has such a safe floor. I mean, he scored over 25 fantasy points PPR-wise without even scoring a touchdown. So it's insane to think about how good this guy is when he's not even scoring. So I think it continues. I think it's why Alvin Kamara does have a safe floor, even when Michael Thomas comes back, because we know that they don't like throwing down the field. So he is the safety outlet for Drew Brees. So I do think that will continue even with Michael Thomas back if he gets healthy enough to come back. And then going on to the Chicago Bears, David Montgomery, he had 21 carries for 89 yards. So kind of a quiet game from him. I mean, it's one of those things where it was a tough matchup. The Saints don't have a bad rushing game, so I think that that's a respectful game to have. And then you added 2 receptions for 16 yards. And then when it comes to the wide receiver role, Allen Robinson, he had a good game, had a remarkable touchdown pass from Nick Foles. He had 6 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown, so a good game from him. Anthony Miller, this is a guy that was on the radar as kind of one of those sleepers for the year. He had 11 targets, but with that 11 targets, he had 8 receptions for 73 yards. Like I said, Jared Cook had a touchdown. And when it comes to the Saints, I mean, we saw Michael Thomas out. We saw that obviously Emmanuel Sanders was out. And then Marquez Callaway was a guy that was getting majority of targets last week, but he was out. So it was like, okay, Traquan Smith has to have a good game, right? And he had 7 targets. He had a respectable 5 receptions for 43 yards. So not bad, but Taysom Hill and Jared Cook are the guys who had the receptions for the touchdown. So just an interesting game overall, and a bizarre game if you look at what happened. So Wims, the receiver for the Bears, went to one of the Saints cornerbacks and just sucker punched him. And it was like, when you watch the replay, it was like Gardner was the only guy that was there. Gardner Johnson was just sitting there like between plays, and Wims comes over and just, it looks like he was trying to see if he had a chain on, try to grab his necklace. Then he punched him in the helmet, then punched him again. And everyone's like, what the heck is going on? And then it always baffles me when players try to hit other players with their helmets on, like with your bare hand. Like, you're going to hurt yourself even more doing that than you're going to give to the guy you're trying to hit. So very interesting, but it looked like it was all just unsolicited. Like, the guy was just standing there. But Gardner Johnson is the guy that Michael Thomas hit in practice as well. So he's known to be a trash talker. So trying to determine what was going on, there was a video that came out this morning that showed that Gardner Johnson actually did spit in Wim's face and then ripped out his mouthpiece. Now, that's based on the footage that was available. I don't know if that's 100% certain, but it looked like there was a play prior to that play that he hit Gardner Johnson that caused him to retaliate, I guess. But just a dumb thing to do, because now he's to be suspended. But obviously, like, I still don't understand why players hit other players with helmets on. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's pretty much pointless. But hey, to each its own. It was just a very interesting, entertaining thing to see yesterday when it comes to, what went on in that game. And then going on to the 49ers and the Seahawks, a good division game. The Seahawks won this game, 37-27. I mean, honestly, the only thing to really talk about in this game is Russell Wilson. Another 4 touchdown passes. DK Metcalf, man, this guy looks like just a man amongst boys. I mean, 12 receptions for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 40 PPR points. I mean, dude was just giving it to them yesterday. And actually, DJ Dallas, obviously we were, Chris Carson was inactive. So was Carlos Hyde. So DJ Dallas, the guy who got the carries, he had a good, if you start him as an emergency pivot, he had a good game for you. So that was good for you to be able to capitalize on that. And then when it comes to like the 49ers, because we didn't know exactly how it was going to play out in the backfield. So we got JaMycal Hasty. He was the guy who led the backfield. He had 12 carries for 29 yards though and a touchdown. So not a great game, but he got you a touchdown. And then he had another reception for 2 yards. So not great overall when it comes to like his attempts as a receiver, but it was good that he was the guy who got the majority of the carries. I mean, Jerick McKinnon, he had a touchdown as well. He had -1 yards rushing, but he gave you another 4 for 40 receiving. Brandon Ayuk was the guy that had a good game. He had 11 targets, which we assume that would be the case because of Deebo Samuel being out. He had 8 receptions for 91 yards and a touchdown. So I think that obviously Brandon Ayuk and Kendrick Bourne would be the two guys that are going to be the 1-2 punch until Deebo Samuel comes back. George Kittle, not a good game from George Kittle. He had 2 receptions for 39 yards. He did leave early with the ankle injury, so that's something to monitor as well. And when it comes to going back to the Seattle Seahawks, last week Tyler Lockett had a career game. This week it was DK Metcalf, and I think you're going to see that week in and week out based on who the defense is that there's going to be a defense that try to stop one guy, and they think they can man up on another. So last week the Cardinals shut down DK Metcalf, and you saw Tyler Lockett have a huge game. Well, this week they try to shut down Tyler Lockett. He had 4 receptions for 33 yards, and then DK Metcalf had a career game on 15 targets. So, it's really hard to defend this team right now because DK Metcalf is just blowing up people. And I'm trying to find a good comparison to a guy. I don't want to compare him to Calvin Johnson, but like a guy who's so big, so physical, so fast, like it's hard. I'm trying to find the right comparison. And for some reason, always Calvin Johnson comes to mind, but it's just hard to discount just how good he is. I mean, I know he came out of the draft. He had a very bad, he was good for straight, with linear, speed, but then his cone drills and all that were just very subpar. But it shows that, this dude can play. So, DK Metcalf, man, he looks like just a star in the making. And then going on to the Sunday night football game, the Eagles versus the Cowboys. Eagles won this game 23-9. Very ugly game overall. Carson Wentz, a lot of turnovers again. This is a guy that I was thinking was going to be a good streamer for this week because the defense, and man, Carson Wentz was just not good at all. It's when you have everything lined up for you to do well, and you tell your listeners to play somebody, and you're confident in that based on the probability and the statistics, and you look at it and then he fails. It's like everything was there, and then it didn't happen. But overall, I think that from a fantasy standpoint, Boston Scott, he did well. He had 70 yards on the ground, and then he had another 2 receptions for 9 yards. And then, honestly, I think this was a good game in the sense of like where you see the Philadelphia Eagles offense going, because you saw that Dallas Goedert came back. He didn't do much last night, but you saw Jalen Reagor. He scored a touchdown. Travis Fulgham had a touchdown. So now Sanders supposed to come back after the bye. They're getting healthier. So I think Carson Wentz continues to be a guy that's trending upward. He did have a bad game, but I do think that Carson Wentz deserves to have some credit going forward in the sense of what they're able to do fantasy-wise going forward. But when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys, man, I don't know what to do about this because Ben DiNucci is not the answer. Hopefully Andy Dalton comes back, but I don't think Andy Dalton's the answer either. It was just hard to watch this offense. I thought Zeke was going to have a bad game. He did have a bad game. Only 63 yards on the ground. I'm wondering now if other than Zeke, is it, and maybe Amari Cooper, because I think Amari Cooper does have, obviously, fantasy value because he's the number 1 wide receiver, but it's, we know with Dak Prescott, when he was playing, it was, CeeDee Lamb was doing well, and Amari Cooper, like everybody on the offense was doing well. Everything ran through Dak Prescott. And now that you see him out, and they're I know it's a 3rd string quarterback, so I get that, so I don't want to be too harsh, but it's almost to the point where is CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup like droppable players now, because I understand Halloween was this weekend, but there's a lot of ghosting going on between Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, because that was not who DiNucci was going for. Michael Gallup was a guy that he targeted 12 times last night. Amari Cooper had 5 targets, but he had 1 catch for 5 yards. CeeDee Lamb, 5 targets. He had 4 catches for 27 yards. Not games that you're expecting. Like in the beginning of the season when Dak Prescott was the quarterback, it was good that if you had Gallup, mostly if you had Cooper and CeeDee Lamb were the guys that benefited the most, and Gallup was the guy that was kind of like the third in order. But when you look at what's going on, it's like even Amari Cooper had a bad game. I just don't know how I feel about this offense going forward. And that affects Zeke too, because if they know they can't pass on you, like if Andy Dalton or whoever's the quarterback can't get the ball to the receivers, then they're just going to load the box and force you to throw, knowing they can guard you guys, which I don't think you can guard any of those guys one-on-one anyways. But man, Zeke, I'm worried about what Zeke's upside is for the rest of the season. That's concerning because he's a guy that you drafted as your number one running back, and not realizing, even though like there's this great offensive weapons for any quarterback that's playing that's not Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott knew how to distribute the ball. He was mobile. I don't know. It's just hard to look at this game and be encouraged about where the Cowboys are going offensively, because this was a bad game overall for the Cowboys. And I'm concerned, and I think Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb are the two guys that are possible like droppable assets on your fantasy roster, because I own CeeDee Lamb in my main league, and I haven't played him the last 2 weeks. I don't think I'm going to play him, going forward until I see something. But just overall, just not good for the Dallas Cowboys. But that's all for the week 8 matchup. So let's go into some of the fantasy studs for week 8. And I'll start at quarterback. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, he led the league at the quarterback position with 46.07 fantasy points. Massive game from him. Russell Wilson was second with 38.27. And then Aaron Rodgers, he was third with 29.47 fantasy points. At the running back position, obviously it's Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook had 48.6 fantasy points. Alvin Kamara was second at 25.3. And Giovanni Bernard was 22.8. So good games from these guys. And that wide receiver, DK Metcalf, led all receivers with 40.1 PPR points. Devontae Adams was at 30.3. And then Robert Woods, he had a good game yesterday despite the Dolphins just tearing the Rams up. He was at 28.4. And going on to the tight end, Travis Kelce, he was at 24.9 PPR points. Jared Cook was second at 16.1. And then Eric Ebron, he had a good game at 14.8. So those are the fantasy studs for week 8. And we still got one more game tonight. We have the Bucs versus the Giants. And if you're watching on YouTube, you see me in my pewter Tom Brady jersey. Now, it's been a long wait for this jersey. This jersey was ordered in April when they revealed their new /retro jerseys. And I ordered it in April. It finally got to me last week. And very, very frustrating, to wait this long for the jersey. But it's on. The Bucs play tonight against the Giants, so I'm excited to wear the jersey and watch the game. I do think the Bucs have an easy win. However, it does make me a little concerned because historically they're bad on primetime. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants win this game, but I don't think it will happen. I think their defense is too good. I think that the Giants are just not very good on offense. I think Tom Brady's right now he's on fire. So I do think that if you have Mike Evans, I think you're in good hands. Hopefully you're not down by too much, because really the only fantasy guys you're probably going to play tonight are going to be you got Ronald Jones, you got Leonard Fournette, you got Tom Brady, you got Gronk, you got Evans, you got you're playing Sterling Shepard, maybe Darius Slayton. You may have to play Daniel Jones if you're in a 2-quarterback league, but there's a lot of fantasy implications tonight, even though it's the Bucs versus the Giants. But I think it's going to be an overall good game. I think that the spread's like 12 points. I think the Bucs cover that. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening today. Now on tomorrow's episode, I'll be going over all my top waiver wire targets for week 9. So make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss that episode for tomorrow. But if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. We're on Twitter and on Facebook at the Gridiron Pod. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.